And chapter 17. Morgan had a dream. She was standing in the corner of the room again, and the room was lit by a color like the sunset. Warm hues spread across the walls like paint. The light came from a lamp resting on a side table. The woman, Morgan's mother, was holding her as a young child, humming that same song, humming the song and crying softly, trying not to wake her. Kiskisito tasso, the mother whispered to the child. Don't forget about who you are. Then Morgan was the child. She looked up at her mother, reached for her and touched her cheek, soft and warm and damp from crying. Morgan felt tears against her fingertips. The word was spoken over and over, from her mother's lips to her ears. There was a knock at the front door. Footsteps moved towards it. Mwach, mwach. Her mother looked towards the bedroom door. She was whispering desperately. It was too late. Morgan heard the front door open. People came inside. She heard angry voices. Her mother stood up from the chair, panicked. She backed away so quickly that she knocked over a lamp. It fell to the ground and shattered. The light went out, and it was totally black. Morgan wailed in her mother's arms, both of them stuck in the dark. Her mother whispered once more, kissing her cheeks, Kiskisito tasso. The door opened and light flooded into the room. Morgan was standing in the corner of the room again, a teenage girl. She was crying too as she watched a man and woman come inside. The man held her mother back. The woman took the child from her mother's arms. Don't take my girl. Morgan sat up in a cold sweat. She was back in the hut. The fire had long since gone out, leaving behind charcoaled wood and a chill in the air. It was morning. Daylight seeped into the hut through the stitching. She could see Ochek, Eric, and Eli. They'd been sleeping and stirred now only because of Morgan's outburst. What's going on? Eli asked. Morgan kept looking around the hut, as though she might be able to see the woman taking the child and stop her. Was the man still holding her mother back? Then she shook her head and closed her eyes tight, willing the vision to leave. She needed to forget the dream, because dreams were meant to be forgotten. Nothing, she said. Sorry. You called out no in the good words, Ochek pointed out. No, I didn't. Morgan touched her lips in disbelief. Yes, you did, Eli said. Mwach, no. I think I remember because it came out of my mouth, Morgan said. You might have thought you said no in your language, but it came out in the good words. Eric was stretching joyfully like a cat. I need some air. Morgan got up. Her entire body was shaking. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Isquasis, Ochek said. It's not that I spoke Cree. It's what I dreamed. Morgan walked to the flap, ready to leave the hut, but stopped there, and despite her best intentions to forget the dream, the nightmare, she played it back, clear and full. Sorry, beeping's my dishwasher. Had she said it? The moment she woke up was the only moment she couldn't remember. She pushed the flap open, walked outside, and what she saw made her scream. Wolf tracks circled the outside of the hut and then led away up the mountain, the direction they needed to go. What is it now? Ochek asked. Tracks. Morgan couldn't take her eyes off the marks in the snow. It was a relatively calm morning, with the sun reflecting off the snow and causing Morgan's eyes to tear up. She wanted wind to push snow over the tracks so she could pretend they were never there. The others came out and saw the paw prints. What do we do? Morgan asked. Go back? We can't turn back. Ochek started to take down the hut. The earlier we start moving, the farther we'll get before dark. The others helped. When they were finished and had their packs on, Morgan grabbed Eli's hand and held it tight. She was determined not to let it go as long as they were outside the hut and walking. Eric had the same idea, finding Ochek's paw and clutching it. Up they went, staying close to one another at all times, which meant that whenever Morgan or Eli fell back, the others did too. There was no wind, which really was a blessing, but the resulting quiet made for undeniable tension. They heard every sound and were sure that each sound was the wolf stalking them. And it may well have been. More than once, a member of the group thought they saw it pacing behind thick patches of snow-covered pines, which were littered here and there up the mountain. A large beast with dark gray fur and yellow eyes. But on second look, the wolf was always gone, and they began to wonder if they were seeing things. I don't think we'd all hallucinate the same thing, like exactly the same, Morgan pointed out, and nobody could argue. The higher they went, the harder it was to talk, because while the air had always been cold, it was getting thinner. The mountains sloped gradually but persistently, and they were following the suggestion of a path, which in the green time might have been an actual path. It wound this way and that, around and through trees, but always higher, always closer to the summit, which didn't seem any closer than when they'd started out. "My legs are burning," Morgan said, still walking hand in hand with Eli. "There's this stair climber in the weight room at school, and this is like going on it and never coming off." "Mine are too," Eli said. "It feels like a trap," she said. "What do you mean a trap? Like Eric is setting us up?" I can hear you," Eric said in a sing-song voice. "No," Morgan said. "A trap by the wolf." "It couldn't know we were coming here. Not to begin with," Eli said. They both took little gasps of air every few words because of the physical exertion and the ever-thinning air. "That doesn't mean it's not planning something," she said. "It's circumstance. It's the wolf's good fortune. That's probably how it sees it anyway, like Ochek when he saw Eric." "I can still hear you," Eric said. "We can't turn back now," Eli said. "I'm not saying we should. I'm just worried, that's all," said Morgan. "I am too," he admitted. They walked for a few more minutes, and then Morgan continued as though they'd never stopped talking. "It's just," she said, "we're climbing up a mountain, and we're getting more tired, and we're all hungry, and who's to say it's not just waiting until we're too tired and too hungry before it decides it's dinner time?" "Well, you don't need to make us more worried," Eli said. They followed the path through a small grove of pine trees. Morgan was thankful each time the path brought them through trees, because she could use them to hoist herself forward and upward. What if the wolf just pounces on us, even if we're all together? Do you think Ochek could fight it off? "I used to go out on the land with my Mosham, my grandpa," Eli said. "Sometimes I'd watch the animals with him just to see what they did. You know, how they went about their day and stuff like that. Watch them build shelters or sleep or eat." "Well, what's your point?" she asked. "I saw a fisher once. He said it killed a beaver, just like that. The beaver didn't even have a chance." "But the beaver's not a wolf," she said plainly. "Beavers are herbivores, aren't they? Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "Well, it made me curious about them," he said, "so I started watching videos and reading about them. They're pretty awesome." "They're talking about you," Eric tugged on Ochek's paw excitedly. "Yes," Ochek sighed, "I know they are." There was truth to what Eli had said. Ochek was awesome. After all, an entire village relied on him to provide them with food. They even hunt porcupines, you know. "Really? Even if they got stuck with their quills or whatever?" "I guess," he said. "I mean, sure, I guess that's better than a beaver, but still, a porcupine isn't—" "I know, it's not a wolf," he snapped, obviously frustrated. "How about we just stick together and hope for the best?" "Stick together," Eric chuckled. "I get it, because the porcupine and how it can stick somebody with quills." "On Earth," said Morgan, "we call that a pun." "I kind of like that sort of joke," Eric said. "They're very punny." "Can you children not encourage her?" Ochek said. They came through the trees and were back out in the open, headed into a long stretch of undisturbed snow. This was a relief because it meant the wolf wasn't near them for the time being, but none of them was foolish enough to think that it had given up. The sunlight glittered off the mountainside, and it looked like a waterfall of stars. At the next group of trees, they sat down in the middle of the grove, and Eli made a fire. Nearby lay a felled pine tree that was thin and long dead. "Come, watch here, Esqueces," Ochek said. He used a small hatchet to cut the tree into smaller pieces, then had Morgan retrieve 2 forked sticks from the ground. Together they cut down a green branch from one of the live trees. Morgan held it down, and Ochek chopped it off. Ochek drove the 2 forked sticks into the ground on either side of the fire and suspended the green stick over the fire with either end secured against the forked sticks. "Wow," she said, "that seemed way harder when I watched you and Eli do it. Now you have what's called a spit, and you could cook over the fire. Well done." "Thank you," Morgan said proudly. "Next thing you know, I'll be making the fires too, and then what'll Eli do? Lie back and relax?" Eli laughed, and then did just that for a moment. "There's always something to do," said Ochek. It was an uneventful lunch. The group noticed their exhaustion only when they finally rested. They sat chewing and sipping until Ochek spoke sharply. "Get behind me." He stood tall, making himself look bigger than he had ever looked before. Morgan and Eli and Eric all moved quickly. There came a growl, low and terrible. Ochek raised his arms from his sides protectively, corralling the others behind him. Another growl and a sharp bark. Morgan shuffled to the side and stretched her neck so she could see over Ochek's shoulder. Eli grabbed her hand, and she thought her hand had never been held so tight. He was either scared or wanting her not to move. Likely both. But then he edged out to the side as well and looked out from behind Morgan. The wolf was standing on all fours at the end of the grove, between the travelers and the top of the mountain. Its entire body was covered in dark gray fur, which seemed only there to frame the yellow eyes, more blinding than the sun reflecting off the snowy terrain. Even more pronounced than the wolf's fur or eyes was its size. Beings across ASCII were in varying stages of starvation, their fur matted and thin, failing to hide the fact that they had no meat on their bones. But the wolf appeared well fed, a hulk of an animal, healthy, its body thick and strong and horrifying. "It's not from here," Morgan whispered. "Quiet, Esqueces," Ochek whispered, his body unmoving. "But she's right," Eli whispered. "Look at it. It's not starving." "It's from where there's summer," Morgan said. Each of them refused to take their eyes off the wolf. The wolf, likewise, didn't take its eyes off the group. It may as well have been a statue, unmoving until ready to strike. "I heard the summer birds were being held by a man in a cabin just past the mountains," Eric said. Those aren't exactly GPS coordinates," Morgan said. "All we need to do is get past the wolf and over the mountain," Eric said. "Simple." "Simple?" Morgan said. "How are we going to make it past that thing?" "If that's true," Ochek said, "it means the wolf isn't here to eat us now, and it wasn't going to eat me years ago." "Yeah, but isn't that what wolves stalk people for?" Morgan asked. "To eat them?" "No, it's here to keep us away from the green time," Ochek said. "I didn't know it back then, or I might have tried to fight it. I know it now." At that moment, the wolf rose from its forepaws to stand on its hind legs. It straightened out its back, and with an awful crack, extended its claws and puffed out its chest. Now standing with a decidedly evil smirk, it looked bigger than it had before. Its shadow fell over them as the sky itself had been covered. Ochek reached down, picked up the hatchet he'd used to cut the wood, and clutched it firmly. "You're right, Ochek." When the wolf spoke, it sounded like he was growling. He had a deep and gravelly voice. "I'm not here to eat you, but I will. Go back to Misawa. You were smart enough to do that before." "Go back and what, die?" Ochek asked. "Die with your village," the wolf said. "It's only right. You've suffered together." "I'd rather die fighting than die hungry." Ochek pulled out his knife to wield a weapon in either paw. Anticipating a battle, Eric took one of the hut poles out and wielded it like a staff. Morgan grabbed the end of a piece of wood in the fire and picked it up. A torch was better than nothing. Eli just kept backing away, his heels sliding through the snow, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with fear. The wolf took one step forward. "You're with the man," Ochek said. "Why?" "Better there than here, wouldn't you say?" the wolf asked. "You're a traitor," Ochek said. "I stay in the green time," the wolf said, "and in turn, I keep the two-legged out." "That's exactly what Ochek meant when he said you were a traitor," Eric said. "You're just agreeing with him." "This is fun for me. I'm no traitor," the wolf said. "When I'm tired of the man, I'll kill him too." "Well, come with us," Ochek said. "Release the summer birds so that we can all live the way we're meant to live." "And stay with you in your village?" the wolf asked. "Pathetic." "So," Eric said, "that's a no?" "I'll take the green time rather than all 4 seasons in their endless cycle." The wolf took another step forward. He was now in the grove. Morgan reached for the torch. Eric held her staff out in front of Morgan defensively. Ochek stepped towards the wolf, his weapons at the ready. The wolf growled and bared his teeth. "Now," he said, "I gave you a choice." "There is no choice," Ochek said. "If you think you're as vicious as we are determined, then shut up and fight." The wolf looked back and forth across all 4 of them, sizing each of the travelers up, looking at their weapons, meeting their eyes, paying particular attention to Eli. This made Morgan step in front of Eli and grab onto her torch with both hands, as if she was holding an axe. The wolf's bright yellow eyes narrowed as his eyebrows furrowed, and he let out a violent growl, long and sharp, and then he backed out of the grove and dropped to all 4s again. "You'll be at the summit by nightfall," he said. "I'll give you that time as a courtesy to think about how awful you want your death to be." We won't change our minds," Ochek said. "Then I'll see you very soon," he said. The wolf strode away slowly and deliberately. When the wolf was gone, they were finally able to relax and lowered their weapons. "Are you okay?" Morgan asked Eli, who was still shaking. "Yeah," but his trembling lips and voice said otherwise. "I'm fine." She dropped the wood back into the fire and took his hand in hers. "We can leave. We can always leave." "Stop saying that," he said. "Why didn't he just finish us off?" Ochek asked, more to himself than anybody else, it seemed. Eric answered anyway. "You heard him. This is sport. He knows he can kill us whenever he wants." "No," said Ochek. "There's something else." "He can't have been scared of us," Eric said. "Maybe he feels guilty for what he's doing," Ochek said. "That wolf?" Eric said. "Did we just see the same wolf?" "Well, then how would you explain it?" "Me?" Eric shook her head. "I'm just happy to be alive." They packed up from lunch without talking about the wolf or the choice he'd given them, left the grove, and continued towards the peak. Now it refused to stay in the distance, forever out of reach, as it had seemed earlier in the day. Now it looked closer and closer by the second. Morgan couldn't help but wonder if they were climbing toward their death rather than Misawa's salvation.